So IoT fatigue, how many of you have felt it already? No, not yet?
Or running from the tsunami.
Yeah. Well, I think the premise of it was that, as you'll see, is that you can't have only so many devices before you start getting sort of pushback. And I think that that's where I see some of the issues coming up with how we build apps and how we do devices. So, but what do you guys think of the conference so far? Yeah?
Good.
Yeah?
When you go through this whole IoT fatigue thing,
Yeah?
I think my perspective is we're just barely going, we're going to this from early adopters and just barely touching general consumer
Yes, yes.
adoption.
I totally agree.
So if we're not quite into consumer adoption yet, this whole fatigue thing, where it fits in with that.
Sure, sure.
With social networking, when it first came out,
Yeah.
the service providers all had to be on, where, you know, it was pounded into their heads. You have to be on this and this and this and this. And
Right, right.
1,000 of them, and the service providers didn't even know what social networking was. It was a completely new concept, like IoT is for the consumer. And so narrowing that down to what's really appropriate and fits, I'm guessing is what this is about.
Partly, this is a lot of it has to do with some of us early adopters and the way we build the software to interact with these devices. And so some of the things that you're just extrapolating from the present to 5 years from now, if we stay on the current course of how we're building things, then you may get there. And I think you will. Because as someone who's got lots of devices now, I'm like, oh, God, not another device, not another app, not another. So it's my premise, you'll see, you'll get it in 5 slides, and then it'll address what you're talking about, is not the fact that consumers don't yet have this stuff, but the thing is that if we continue on the current course, it's easy to extrapolate out to see where it could hit a problem. And so, you know, then I'll offer you a few options, but you can think about how you could avoid, you know, the one app per device is an issue that I see a lot of. Like making a user, the current thing, like when you go buy a device, you have to go and download an app. You have to pair it, you have to install it, you got to do, and extrapolate from there. But that.
There's 2 consortiums right now for IoT. And it's interesting because for enterprise, there's really only one consortium for IoT, but for consumer, there's 2.
Yeah.
Would you be able to address the fact that there's 2 and how they're going to play in this?
No, I don't get into there aren't too many standards, but my perspective is from the software development, mobile or desktop, things that talk, the app development side of it. So yeah. So it's sort of a high level look at what the pattern is. I'm building my regular job, I'm building lots of apps to talk to devices, and I see these patterns emerging about the way these things are being built. So, and I just think the way we do things is just not very sustainable. So that's one of the issues.
Well, I think the consortiums are trying to figure out, you know, how do we standardize so that we go and just, you know, it.
Yeah, no. Well, wait till you get to the end of it and then tell me if it's on the right track. But I'm looking for people who think about these things to also kind of cause them to think a little bit ahead, like just a little bit ahead. How would you do it? So, no, that's all right. That's all right. That's all right. Should I start? I'm going to turn this off.
Please do.
Okay, thank you. Hi, my name is Ramin Firoozye, and welcome. We're going to get into the afternoon final stretch of this thing, and hopefully before the Giants start their game. So this presentation is not another app. Fill in the blanks. How to avoid IoT fatigue. And I've got a lot of stuff, so I'm going to go through pretty fast. So if you want to hold your questions till the end, then I'm going to run through tons of these slides. So let me begin. Let's strap in. So today we have lots of these connected devices, right? You've got your smart homes, and you've got your locks, and you've got your bracelets, and all these wearables, and a variety of things. And there's tons of them coming. The issue is that there's one app per device. right? So in order to use your smart home, smart things, you got to go get the smart things app. You want to use your August lock, you got to go get the August lock app. You want to get your Fitbit, you got the Fitbit app, right? So tomorrow, not very distant future, extrapolate. You're going to expect people to buy another device, which means install another app, right? So problem is, so how do we avoid it? Are you going to have 100 apps on your device? Are you going to have 100 devices? Maybe, especially if everything's ubiquitous around you. How do you avoid getting this one-to-one model and going beyond it? So the root cause I would propose is this one app, one device thing, right? Every time I go out, the current model is I'm going to build an app, I'm going to buy an app, I'm going to pair it with this thing, now it sits there. And to see why that happens is to think about how do these devices communicate. They usually use Bluetooth LE or Wi-Fi or classic Bluetooth, right? So I'll focus more on Bluetooth LE because that seems to be the prevalent short-range wireless standard connecting devices and software. So these are the ones that are most often being used. But the same problem applies across the board to all of them. So for those who don't know, Bluetooth LE, BLE, BTLE, the different varieties. But it basically, the way it works is there's some firmware on the device, and the device itself has the hardware, maybe a little bit of logic, maybe a little bit of storage, but mainly it's communicating something back and forth to the app. And on the app side, on the phone, you've got the user experience and the user interface, and then it's communicating with the device, but then also it kind of acts like a gateway to the internet. Bluetooth LE is based on this concept of a GAT, which is a database of services that contain characteristics, and those characteristics can send events, can be set and get, basically key value, right? So on the phone, you set a key value, magically it shows up on the other end. But the description and metadata of what that is baked into the device. So you say, unlock the door, and it sends a little signal across to that specific key, and the door unlocks. If you ask for it, you have to go look for a specific variable in there, and that's the lock status, for example. And in Bluetooth LE world parlance, these all have universal UUIDs. They're unique and long, and so the device, both sides need to agree which of those variables are going to do what the function feature has to be. And the lock status comes back in a different UUID. So that's the typical model. The key thing is, though, that communication layer is baked into that device right now. And same thing, the workflow and the communication is baked into the phone. So what you end up is a protocol that the firmware developer and the app developer have agreed upon. They say, I'm going to send it over here, I'm going to send it over there. The other guy says, okay, I'll expect this. The problem is, that's how you get one app to one device. Because that description of how you make the communication is baked into both sides of the equation. So that's how you get silos. That's how you get one app only talks to this device, and that device only talks to that one app. So this is it's a little dark there, but it's a very device-specific protocol, right? That's silo. So inevitably, what happens is you get 10 devices, you end up with 10 apps. You get 15 devices, 50 devices, you get with 50 apps, and so on and so forth. So that's where the problem. The root cause of it is that model. And you end up with things that you may not really want to see happen to your pet devices. So how do we avoid it, right? If you think about it, if you agree with the premise that if you're in the IoT business, if you're in the consumer, let's say, business, and you want to have people buy more and more devices as time goes on, inevitably, they're going to end up with that many applications on their phone. And today, I don't know about you, but maybe you use a few of those apps, not all of them, but this is going to force them to remember which app went with which device, when to update it, when to run it, which should I run to do that, that kind of a thing. So the trick is, I would propose, is decoupling, right? So what you do is you take out that communication protocol and the way they communicate, the two devices, and you put as much of it as you can onto the web, into a registry. So the app that comes along says, hey, I'm talking to an August lock, right? It goes and looks up on the web and says, how do I talk to an August lock? And that registry says, here's the way you do it. Here are the characteristics that you're looking for. And then now they keep talking. That simple decoupling ends up giving you lots of benefits. For example, you can basically look up any device You can effectively say, I've got one app that can talk to any of these devices, because as soon as I come near that device, or as soon as I'm using that device, it's going to look up on the registry, and it can cache it, so performance could be good. But it gives you a huge amount of benefit. It lets you have very flexible communications architecture. It lets you have a single SDK, if you want, software development kit, to talk to all of these devices. It detects a device and it says, how do I talk to it? And it gets back the response, and now it merrily goes about its way. It also simplifies the first out-of-box experience for the users, because if they already have an app that can use this mechanism, they don't need to install anything else. They can just bring it close to each other, and then it's done, right? Another good thing about it is that right now, if you have a device, it's locked into that vendor's app. The data on it cannot be brought out. So if you have a Fitbit, the Fitbit data cannot be taken out of that device itself. But if they had a public registry of how to talk to that device and an SDK that could talk to it, you could have a whole ecosystem of apps that can talk to the Fitbit. They can synthesize a heart rate and a Fitbit and a footpod and you name it, and create all kinds of cool apps just by decoupling from that device and that app. You can also be cross-platform. You can have SDKs for Android, for iOS, you could have watches, you can have all kinds of cool stuff. And by going through this mechanism, you get all of the benefits. You describe the protocol once, and all these devices can talk to your chosen device. Another advantage of that is that you can also, since you've got the description of the protocol, this is the characteristic, this is the value, you can actually technically spit out the firmware necessary to compile and put onto the device. So at least the first parts of it, of that communication mechanism, it can generate code for you. So now you can focus on, what does this thing do? Does this turn the light on? Does it sense the temperature or the heart rate or whatever it needs to do? So that communication layer process could be completely automated as long as you have a rich definition of how that thing works. But that's not the whole problem. I still have the issue of, I've got one app, but I still have to remember to go install. I got to go download the app, I got to go install it, and then every time I walk up to the device, I got to remember to run the thing, right? So I'm being trained to periodically go and run the thing. So the second problem is that I go buy it, I install it, I run it. But a week, a month, a year later, which app was that? That's the problem, right? So there is an existing solution to this, and it's called Bluetooth proximity, or iBeacons. Beacons are capable of launching, at least on iOS and soon on Android with services, of launching the app that is looking for that beacon. So if these devices broadcast their device type, right, and said, I am a Fitbit 1, then an app could set up and say, anytime you're near your Fitbit 1, launch me, I'll make sure it's the right one. I'm good to go, right? So now you get a scenario where you don't even have to manually run the app. You just walk near it, right? So you get automatic app launching as a benefit. You detect it, it automatically launches, you're good to go. So on iOS, you can implement this currently, today, from iBeacons. And on Android, you can set up a service to do this. Just scan in the background until it finds the thing, and it's good to go. The third part of the problem is that you have many apps, right? So we want one app, really. We want one to talk to all these devices. But to do that, each app has its own flavor. Each app has its own functionality. It has logic. So on the phone, you've got, I sort of briefly said UI, UX, communication, and internet. In reality, there's lots going on inside an app. There's the interface, there's the workflow of toggling between this and that. There's how much it's storing, there's analytics, it wants to talk to the address book maybe they get to take a picture, GPS, all this other stuff, right? So to implement that kind of functionality today, that leads to this, you have to buy the device, you have to install the app on an app store, then you have to run it because it has to be a native app. And currently that's the only way you can get native apps, right? That install app part is really what is causing this silo effect. That's the way you get the app. You go to the app store, you get the app, install it, but then now you've bought all the other problems that comes with it. So the app acquisition model forces you into this. You don't want to be installing apps. You want to have one app that can tell what kind of device it is, and then you can come in and say, okay, Just get me the parts that I need dynamically. Let's bring that in. And now I'm talking to the device. That's kind of where we want to head, right? So you don't want to necessarily be going through app stores given the current model. But what we really want are streamable apps, right? Apps that could be streamed off the web. But these are called web apps. We have that today. The problem is that they are native. They can't talk to the device. The Bluetooth, they can't talk. They can do some Wi-Fi, but they can't do any of the system level stuff that we need in order to make this happen, right? So we need all the rest of this stuff. But web apps can't give us too many of these. So native apps can. So cool. But native apps mean App Store. So we're stuck. It's not a web app. It's got to be a native app, but native app means you got to go to the App Store. So what we need is a streamable native app, right? Something that you can stream down through the internet, and it's deployed as a native app. What you really want, I think, I would propose, is something that gives you the ease of markup and scripting. You can script it, you can stream it from the web dynamically, but it's a native app, right? And so to have something like that means that then you can put that next to the proximity, and you can put that next to the decoupling of the interface from the device itself, and you get lots of cool things that can produce from that. You want really HTML++ is really what we need. We need something with a bit more capability. We want something post-HTML or maybe super mega HTML. But we need to extend that model because the streamability buys us so much more, right? And there are a couple of different ways to do that. One of them is to extend HTML to say, hey, I'm going to add these native capabilities. And it's getting a little bit easier. Until now, it's been really up to the device vendor to give you that capability. So they needed access to the GPS, so you had to wait till Apple or Android added access to the accelerometer and the compass and they baked it into the whole standards layer and all that. So it took a long time. So one way is you can go in now and try to tack in controls. Now there are third-party tools out there, but they compile. They let you call native the native layer, but they have to compile it, which means you got to put it on the App Store, and so on and so forth. You lose the flexibility of the streamability, which is what I think is so cool about HTML. Or you need something completely different. Stream from the web. Talk to devices. You want it to be native. That's really what it is. Right? So if we had that, let's assume we can do this. Some sort of magically we can do all of this. Let's put it together. Right? You have one app that can talk to any device. It can bring in the interface and the app mechanism that talks to the device dynamically by virtue of just being near it, right? You don't need to have a whole, this model of I'm going to buy one, I'm going to install it, I'm going to run it. This thing just would streamline. So the streaming gives you dynamic installation. The proximity would give you the automatic launching mechanism that I talked about. And the protocol registry opens it up so you can talk to any device, right? So if you put them all together, your silos go boom, right? And that's what I want you guys to think about is the fact that if we continue on this current model that we have right now as makers of devices, connected devices, inevitably we end up in a place where there's hundreds of apps. The user's like, what do I run? I can't remember. I have devices. I don't know what app goes with them. They're named differently than the device itself. So they're lost. They're orphaned. I can't use the device. Throw it out the door. So having rows and rows of apps, I think, is an issue. So if we had that in a not too distant future, if we had these capabilities, you could have the app that talks to anything, the unicorn app, and we would get any device. You just come near it. It loads up the right interface. It just knows, and it just works, right? So we go from this to this. So that's sort of my premise of it. So please.
Okay, so your premise is that there has to be an additional HTML++, and I'm not technical.
Yeah.
I used to be.
Yeah.
When assembler was But how is it that IFT and its new IoT entry is different than that?
You mean than HTML?
No, then, I mean, is IFT and its new direction
Right.
answering this problem?
No. No,
why not?
because if the way that is set up is basically, you mean, are you talking about the IFT app?
Yeah.
Okay, so what they do is they set up a service that connects things and takes data and attaches them on the server, right? And then sends you the result to the front. Now that app itself currently has baked into it certain types of capabilities that the designers of it sort of thought it would be useful. It could launch an app, it could do something, it could do, they baked into it certain capabilities.
It can now talk to devices.
Because they baked into it that capability. Now, that capability should be generally available. That's a good first step. That's why I said it's got to be an app that sits there and it allows you, gives you the streamability, the ability to bring in a completely new interface dynamically. But it also talks to the devices. So it's the sort of the web approach of I'm going to go visit something and the stuff is going to flow into me, dynamically married to I got to talk to a device, right? So the IFT app gives you some of that. It gives you, they have a protocol set up, they send you the event, or you go get the thing and polls, and then inside it they baked in the ability to go in and talk to Bluetooth, for example. It's just one app, and it's only limited types of interactions. If you actually try to talk to any device, it's not just even the characteristics of themselves. There's actually sort of a workflow involved. So there's a little bit more richness that needs to be there. When you're talking to like a bracelet, let's say, the easy thing is to go in and say, hey bracelet, what's your value of this thing? That's the very simple model. But in some cases, you have to send it something first and then go retrieve the value later. So there's a little bit more of a complexity workflow involved. That kind of stuff you can't capture necessarily just by saying, oh, I can just talk Bluetooth to the device. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So if there's a good first step, I think the browser is a good ultimate destination where, because I get the streamability. I can go into a website, download an app and bring it, and it has native controls, native capabilities. It can talk to anything I want, and it has baked into it the scripting information, all the stuff that I need to make it look and feel like a real native app. But that's the missing part. The registry is, I think, another missing part, because I want to be able to dynamically decouple from the device. So get out of the one app, one SDK, one device rut. And the third one is to make the user experience better, is to do the proximity. Now, the proximity is optional, but without each of those, if I don't have proximity, then I got to remember which app I got to go manually run it. If I don't have the device registry, I'm only talking to specific devices that have been baked into my app currently. So I'm always in a constant race to update with a new device. But if the data's on the web, they push it out, now I can talk to it.
It just got $40 million to dive into this IoT thing.
Yeah.
They got it after they already had developed what's out there now,
Right.
which is talking to devices.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on them going in this direction?
If they, I hope they do. I hope they, I basically what I'm putting out is to the beginnings of the thought that we need these kinds of things, right? I've personally been working on a bunch of these underlying technologies, but it's not quite there yet. But I think people should be thinking about this, because the end result is good.
Yeah,
It means I just walk up to anything and boom, I'm there. I've got it, right? So, I'm sorry, go ahead.
For your HTML++ segment, have you considered or looked into QML for that?
Yep, it can. Unfortunately, some of the do they let you do dynamic rendering of that though? I thought you had to compile that.
No, so the QML part can be streamed from the web as long as you're using system deployed modules. So
Yes.
within standard functionality, it does what you need.
Yes.
Standard functionality would have to grow in order to have all those points.
Fair enough. Yeah. No. So that's one good approach, is to use an alternate markup language and bake into it the libraries you need to talk to devices. even if HTML doesn't do it, that would be a good approach, is to take that, add in all the stuff that you need, the extra stuff that you need, and then push it through like that. Go ahead.
The comment and a question. The comment is that the unicorn app seems a little bit like the IoT version of the universal remote, and the world seems to divide into two camps.
Camps, sure.
Who likes those and who doesn't.
Right.
I'm the one that doesn't, so I'm a little less excited about that. I love everything else, though, particularly the protocol registry. But how do you get the vendors on board for that? Because you need
For the device, for the protocol registry? So one thing you do is you try to get a standards body to support it, that concept, right? So if it's part of the standard, that's one thing. The other part is, if you use such a system, you get a universal SDK that everybody can use across multiple platforms. You can get firmware spit out for you, so you save development time and cost, expensive development, and you can also tweak the stuff. So there's direct benefits to them for adopting something like that. And then on top of it is, you can turn around and say, look, instead of sitting there and building this custom app that talks to your device, you can deploy that interface on the web. And you can rev it, you can change it. And the user doesn't need to do anything. They don't need to reinstall an app. They don't need to get, so you can actually customize the content for different regions, for different age groups, for different, you can even do stuff like that. The dynamic apps give you that kind of a thing. So I think the trick is to go through the standard, and I've actually talked to Bluetooth or SIG about this. And I gave them the basic idea of that, and they were like, that's great. So I still have to put them into the right place to show them the rest of the story. I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think one of the answers, in my opinion, how do you convince them to the vendors to, give up the control they have right now, is I think it'll happen naturally for some devices, right?
Right.
Pedometers, there's a lot of value added in the services right now. There's a lot of arguments that they need to do special algorithms to detect activities. May not be true. I think there's some subset of pedometers that are good enough. They're going to be very easy for anybody to make.
Right.
So a company that is just a manufacturer and is okay just selling the hardware once and taking that profit only and doesn't need to support.
Right.
Doesn't need to support a huge cloud staff of engineers with a continuing revenue stream. That if they would very readily adopt a standard interface to let other people use the interface they would sell them.
Sure.
There are analogies in the past like this with when network cards were new, people had to write, the network company had to write all the drivers and write custom value management routines, and eventually settled on like a standard NE1000 interface baked into Windows, and boom, hardware manufacturers just start selling cards. That's all they have to do. They don't have to write drivers. Support calls.
Right. Yeah.
Light bulb is maybe even a better example, right? I mean, it's like, sure, you can add color changing, but like just...
Right, light bulbs. They mostly do the same thing. We have historically another example of how this stuff could really work. In the old days before Windows started baking in printers, some of you are too young to remember this, but Windows, it used to be printer hell. You went and bought a printer, and there was a device driver disk that came with it, a floppy disk. You had to stick that in, install it, and run it, and now it would talk. Without that driver, nothing, right? So Windows comes along and says, look, we are going to publish an API, a standard interface to all printers. And they created a central registry. And so the vendors could make their drivers all sort of comply with this basic minimum functionality, but they could do extras as well, right? So the nice thing that happened was now you could go to the store, you could buy a printer, stick it into your machine, and it would work. And printer sales went nuts because that driver juggling disk write version thing was stopping the adoption of these things. And I think when it comes to consumer, to your point, we're not quite in the mainstream consumer edge of it. But to get there, it's got to be simplified. The process has to be simplified. The way we have it now, I think, is going to end up being where I mean, if you agree with the beginning and the end, then the middle is kind of several ways to go, but it's going to end up that way.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay. I like this, don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
But suddenly, one potential problem leaps to mind. Inherent when we install an app is our choice to use that app. Now, if we have apps jumping at us every time we approach them, how do we set up an environment where we still make choices?
Sure.
And then even if we do make the choice, now that we have it streamable, we could think of it in terms of many, many potential apps for this one application.
Sure.
And all the vendors going, well, I want you to use mine because more and more it's the service.
Sure, sure, absolutely.
How do we control that new dynamic?
Great question.
I think it's wonderful.
Yeah.
You know.
No, it's a great question. I think what will happen is when you get a device, right, you have taken an action, you've made a decision, I purchased this device, and you have to put it into a pairing mode. So you can't just randomly pick up. It could, but maybe you don't want to do it. Maybe you don't want to accidentally just enable it. But so if you have a pairing state that you put it in, which is your out-of-box experience, you get this, you push a button, you shake it, you do something to put it in a mode that now tells the phone, to the device, that it's now ready to go. Now you've indicated interest in that thing. Now it goes and gets to the thing, it brings it in. And from then on, now what you can do is you should be able to tweak it and say, look, I don't want to just randomly. So a problem that comes out, now that's a great question, because if you have apps for 20 devices, as you're wandering around, is it going to keep popping up? No, it shouldn't. There should be good user experience there to let the user choose. It should give you the option of switching modes to that device, right? But the fact is that it's not going to be, I'm caricaturizing it a little bit as far as it'll pop up. It'll show that it's available, but you need to choose to run it still, because you may not want it to disturb you. And to the point of having multiple apps then that can talk to that device, I think that's great. I think it gives the user a lot of choice. One app could just be showing you raw data, but another one could go and aggregate it with another device and put it together. All of these apps that are Fitbits, all the wrist-based accelerometer ones, they suffer from the fact that they don't work. I used to wear one of those for a year. If you're bicycling, they don't work. Your hands are like this. You're not moving. So they register nothing, right? But if you paired that with a footpod, if you paired it with a heart rate monitor, if you paired it with a GPS, now you've got a whole rich set of data that you can now offer unambiguously, that this is what you're doing. So great. But none of those apps work across all of these devices, right? And the reason is because of the silo effect, because the vendor tied their app to that device. It's baked in. Nobody else can get in unless they publish an SDK, and some do. Great. I'm just saying, let's institutionalize that. Let's make it so that anybody can do that. And so one of those many apps says, hey, I do just the Fitbit. But another one says, I do Fitbit plus this, plus this, plus this, the whole picture. Awesome. The user can now choose which one of them they want to use. But without such a system, I mean, you guys think about it. That's why I wanted to put it out, is without such a system, we are headed towards that 1,000 apps, 100 apps on your device, none of which talk to each other, lots of silos, each of them behaving a different way, right? And cautionary tale is what I'm putting out, is I think it's now a good time to stop and think and try to avoid ending up there. Please.
So going back to one of the earlier questions about getting vendors on board, how bad is it if a vendor chooses not to? I mean, are these protocols reversible? Are we able to, is that just completely illegal?
It's not illegal. The thing is that, so for BLE, for example, so a simple BLE interface says, here's a characteristic, and here's the value, right? So the value of that, like a light bulb, could be a 0, 1, right? For a dimmer, it could be 0 through 256. They don't publish. It's very easy to sniff out currently what those UUIDs and services are. Those are public. The GAP broadcasts that stuff out. It's connectable. You've got apps on devices that can sniff that. What you don't know is what's inside those values. What kind of value goes in there? More importantly, though, is maybe there's more than just I'm going to go read that value. Maybe I need to send it something, and then it comes back in some bit pack that I need to unpack, right? So that sort of a flow of activity is stuff that, unless they put it on, it makes it harder to reverse engineer. It's not impossible to reverse engineer. The Rolling Spider, Parrot, makes a quad drone, which is BLE enabled. And I'm working with a friend of mine, and we're trying to reverse engineer it because we want to control it from our watch, right? If they had published that interface, if it was available on a registry, and there was an SDK for the watch, it would take us an hour to write an app to have a watch version talking to it, right? But they don't. So now they're making life hard for us. And once we reverse engineer it, we're going to publish that spec and let everybody else write to it, right? But the advantage for the vendor is going to be, by publishing it, they get their firmware generated, they get all of us hacking on it and having directly talking to the device, right? And we get SDKs across different platforms. So they get an Android version for free. They get an iOS version for free. They can embed all that stuff into it and go nuts with it. So I think the carrot there, there's no stick here. There's a carrot is you're going to save tens of thousands of dollars worth of development energy on that device if you just go stick it on a registry. And you'll get an ecosystem of people building cool things around your device.
You'll sell more devices.
Sorry?
And you'll sell more devices.
Absolutely. I don't see the downside. The only downside I see is if that manufacturer likes to lock you in. They get benefit from that lock-in because they feel like they need to have that app and that data be streamable. Fitbit today, if you go get a Fitbit, doesn't give you access to the data, but you have to go get it from their server. So you have to, the only way you can get that data legally is to sign up on their developer program, and they can throttle you and all that kind of stuff. And you have to go get it from their server, which means they want the data on the server. It's not about the bracelet, it's not about you, it's about their server. So that's the only reason I can think of that a device manufacturer may be resistant to that. But if you say, look, spending an hour, 2 hours defining the protocol, and you get all this stuff for free out of it, and it saves you tens of thousands of dollars, I mean, do the math. So, any other? No? Great, thank you. This is, I hope you all build cool, shareable devices. Thank you much.